Welcome to Mum Days, a beautiful collective of mamas and experts sharing wisdom, inspiration, and life hacks to support us on this journey through the hazy days of motherhood. Well, welcome back to the Mom Days podcast. I'm your host, Holly Lau, and this week, to go along with our amazing in-depth theme that we've been doing for the last little while on trauma and all things related to trauma, I am so lucky to have all the way from Australia. This is how we get to do things without hopping on a plane, right? The amazing Sharma Southan is with us, and I have to tell you, it was just as much work just to get us coordinated in our time zones and then our time zone change times, and it was just so funny. Anyway, we've managed to work it out, and we're on here together, and this is really great. So thank you for being here. I'm gonna give them a little snippet of who you are and why we're chatting today, but I know you can give us a little more information about your passions and what your background is. But Sharma is a bereaved mom and a rainbow mom, same as myself. And she's a pregnancy loss coach, using those experiences to redefine pregnancy loss and empower women through that whole experience. Because really, there's so much takeaways, even in grief, even in the hurt. There is a lot that we can glean from that experience. So thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I was just had a little giggle to myself because there was a lot of back and forth trying to get the time zones right, and then the time zones changed right. Like
we finally figured it out, and then Eastern, daylight savings time threw it all into a loop.
Yeah. I know. We've had ours change a couple of months ago, so I went through the whole thing then, and I'll go through it all again at the other end. So I know it's so confusing.
They just make it so difficult for us.
Just keep it. I like daylight savings. Just keep it. It's fine.
Parents hate it. We're like, why do we still need this? This is not needed anymore. Except in the fall. Maybe we should just always get an extra hour in the fall, and then we'll be completely thrown off down the road. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not a scientist, as you can tell.
I'm sure it could work.
Somehow. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Anyway.
A little bit off topic.
I love it. Yeah. All the parents can relate.
Oh, it throws my body out. It throws my daughter's body out. And for like the first, few weeks, I'm like, why? Why is this even happening?
Right? Oh my gosh. That's okay.
And as I get older, I'm like, I really can't. My body's like, I'm so tired.
Yeah.
Like, why am I so tired?
My husband and I were watching a show the other night. We're falling asleep at 9:00 on the couch, and we're going, "What is happening to us? We're not that old. What's going on?" Oh, right.
Yes. Anyway.
So I would love to know a little bit more. I mean, if you want to share a bit of your story, feel free. A lot of our listeners have heard our recent story of our loss, and it really is what launched me into this theme, because when we went through this recent one, at 12 weeks was much more intense for me than I'd ever been through. We'd lost another baby at 9 weeks. I have a rainbow baby among my 3 children, and it definitely is something that this time woke me up even more. I think because the first time I was in the thick of it with my little one, my firstborn, and kind of just had to pick up and keep going. And I realize now, looking back, that all the amazing, wonderful experts I've learned from and got to speak with, I was much more aware this time around to allow myself time to grieve, and to allow my family to grieve, and all the things that we had to feel and talk about to really process it. That was new for me, and it was something that brought to light such a need. And it's not that it hasn't been there, it's always been there, as you know. So tell me a little bit about how you got there and why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah. So I kind of just want to touch on too, like, I know like you said, you've gone through a couple of losses to feel like then all of a sudden you've had this like awakening, and you're like, wait a minute, like I actually need to do something here. I need to process. I want to kind of rewind a little bit, because I I guess my journey with grief started when I was 19 when my dad passed away.
Mm,
So that was like I I fell into a deep depression. I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to leave my room. I wanted to live every single day like he was still alive
yeah.
for like a year. And it was, I look back at that now, I'm like, I thought that I was processing things,
Yeah.
but I really wasn't. And I look back at that time and it was a very hard time. And it was something I guess I needed to experience. It was part of my journey, part of my lessons in my life to experience that, to know what the depression feels like,
Mm,
to know that it's not healthy. It's not being in that place doesn't serve you when you're trying to relive
right.
being in the presence of that person that you love. So when we experienced a miscarriage in 2017, and they said it was 7 weeks along. I don't know if it was a boy or a girl. I don't know. I thought it was about 10 weeks, like from what I
Mm,
gathered. Um, so we had already started telling people that we were pregnant, just close family and friends. And when we went into the ultrasound clinic, like to hear those words, "I'm sorry, there's no heartbeat," like that was it was my worst nightmare, but it was a nightmare I didn't even know existed until I was in that space.
yeah.
I'm like, "No, that can't be right. Don't just leave it there. Keep looking, keep searching. There has
Yeah.
to be something there." Because we had been trying to conceive for about 5 years, so it was
Mhm.
something that we really, you know, we
Yeah.
thought it was going to come
Yes.
easily. And, my mum always said to me, my dad would, like, hold hands with her and she'd fall pregnant, and I was like, "Oh," you know, like,
Yep.
stuff like that. It just, you think growing up with those
Yeah.
sort of comments, you think, it's easy.
Yep.
Um, so when that happened, our whole world just was shattered.
Mm,
Um, it was our first pregnancy, so essentially I thought at that point that I was broken,
right.
that I was never ever going to have children again. I thought that it meant that I was infertile. I had no idea really what the whole process
Yeah.
actually meant.
Yeah.
Um, they shuffled us off to our GP. She kind of gave really a brief, "This is what you'll experience when you get home." Um, she told me that it takes usually about 3 weeks for your body to realize that the baby isn't viable anymore, and then you start to miscarry. And so I was kinda at that 3-week mark, thinking that I was about 10 weeks, and it had passed at 7. So it didn't take long for me to start the process, like the
Right.
miscarrying process at home. But what was happening was I ended up bleeding so much and passing out, every
Mhm.
time I would stand up,
Oh
and
my goodness.
then experiencing contractions on top of that. And I was taken um, I have epilepsy as well, so I can only take Panadol. I can't take strong
Right.
pain relief, and for contractions, I was taking Panadol, like paracetamol, like
Yeah.
it's the basic.
It's our version of Tylenol or Advil. Yeah.
Yeah, the lowest level pain relief that you can get.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I was
No.
crying. I don't think I slept the night actually leading into my doctor's appointment that following day. I just kept waking up crying, like in pain. And when the ambulance came and got me, they're like, "Why didn't you call sooner?" And I was like, "I didn't know."
Yeah.
I I was Googling it. I didn't know that this wasn't
Same.
normal.
Same. Yeah.
I said to my husband, I said, "How long is the bleeding meant to last?" And he's like, "Oh, it can last up to 10 days, like according to Google." And I was like, "I'm gonna die." And I
Mm,
legitimately thought I was going to die. I rang my mum, and I was laying on the floor with my feet in the air, and I rang her and I said, "I'm going to die. Like, I can't do this anymore." And I remember writing all of this out and taking it to a psychologist,
Mm,
and she's like just reading it, and she was speechless. She was like, "I cannot believe you like, this is actually what you were experiencing. This is like proper trauma."
right.
And this whole experience was, I legitimately thought I was going to die. So I think I don't even remember talking to her that first session. I just cried. Um, but they rushed me off to hospital and ended up getting a DNC because they said to me that my body just wasn't going to stop on its own. Like, it was just going to sort of keep going through the motions. And yeah, so they put me on heavy pain relief at that point because obviously I had to.
Yeah.
And yeah, they got me in for a surgery not long after I got there, and then sent me home. And I think for a long time after our experience, like after coming home from the hospital, I felt like I couldn't cry anymore. I felt like I'd cried so much that I couldn't cry anymore. And then I was just numb. And I remember mum telling me that you can still experience like the baby blues essentially
Yeah.
without having a baby. And I was like, this is the worst experience ever. I had contractions. I'm experiencing the really deep and like mood
Mhm.
lows, like the deep emotional lows, and I don't have a baby to show for it.
Yeah.
Um, so that was all such a hard thing to wrap my head around.
Yeah.
But yeah, so kind of in a nutshell, that was that was my
Yeah.
experience.
Absolutely. I like how you said it was proper trauma. It's funny because we have these defining moments in our life where we can look and go, "Oh my goodness, that actually was traumatic. Like that
Mm,
deeply impacted me as a person, as a human being with a soul. Like
mm,
it has imprinted on me who I am and how I respond to that is
mm,
all part of that." So it's true. And I think as women, so often we brush it off as well.
mm,
That's just the way our bodies worked. And that's how lots of women they go through this and that's that. I know I
yeah.
felt the way the first time around. I just felt like, well, great. My body did what it was supposed to do, must have needed to happen, whatever.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
deep, like inside, I was wrecked. Like it didn't feel that way. And same, I can so relate to all those, the postpartum feels and all the hormone changes. And I would lose every time I would lose my appetite for weeks.
Mm,
And I remember talking to our midwives after this last one, and her just reminded me that there is a lot of emotional load involved in what you just
mm,
went through. You can't
yeah.
ignore that. Your body on a cellular level understands that trauma, even if your brain is trying to rationalize it.
Mm,
It
yeah.
really is what made me look into this even more because I thought this is a very impactful moment and we're talking about birth trauma and pregnancy loss. But there are other parts of our lives, maybe our childhood or any experiences we had that have imprinted on us and can
Mm,
affect our ability to get pregnant. It can affect yeah, I lost my dad. I can relate to that too. I lost my dad and I remember every time I'd walk into my parents' house and I'd hear the door close, I'd look up to think he was coming home. You know,
mm,
it's just that instinctive thing that you want to recreate and you want to feel that all the time. And that was a deep trauma that later when we
mm,
tried to get pregnant again, it had impacted my body. Even though my
yeah.
brain felt like I had grieved and I'd done all the things, it hits our bodies and our body
Mm.
doesn't lie, right? It's
No.
just our emotions don't lie. We can try and lie to ourselves or hide them or cope in other ways, but
Mm,
so true.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was like going into kind of like you said it, how it impacts your body on a cellular level until I started to really understand that. I've had lower back pain my whole
Mhm.
entire life. And now realizing that that is where, like suppressed emotions can actually sit, and grief and sadness.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, yep, that makes sense because I totally until I'm still processing my dad's
Me
death.
too.
Like
Yeah.
am still processing his that experience, that grief,
Yeah.
and I thought like you said, you think you do it in your mind,
Yeah.
but in your body, like, yeah, there's still so much we we try to get back to a sense of normal
Yes.
by ignoring the emotions because they're an inconvenience.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't cry now because, I'm out or whatever.
That's right. Yeah.
You're like, I can't be an emotional wreck
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. I just fell apart because that song reminded me or that person looked like, or it's happened
Yeah,
to me so many times where I remember going through a drive-through at the coffee shop that he would always go through the drive-through at. And this was years after he had passed away. And I remember hearing the person ordering inside his coffee. And it was just like in my head, I'm going, that is the dumbest thing ever. But I had tears in my eyes and I was trying to like pull it together. And the poor
yeah.
woman giving me my order at the window is probably thinking, "What is wrong with you?" But
It's
it's
like,
those
just
things that
take
pop
your
up. Yeah,
mm,
it's those moments that I would never have like in my conscious mind was not thinking that through, but and the emotional level of our bodies, that's printed on us. And
mm,
that you're right, that grieving process, it goes on. It doesn't
mm.
just, okay, I'm done. I've gone through the final stage of grief and now we're good. It
Okay,
doesn't.
I'm an
I
accepting.
wish. I wish it was that simple, but it doesn't because, my kids, my oldest reminds me of my dad. So he'll do something or he looks a lot like him or he'll do something that reminds me of him and it'll just pop up out of nowhere.
Mm,
Or, the other day I was putting some things away and because we had gotten, past the 3-month mark with this pregnancy, I had pulled out some baby things. I had the car seat out, was cleaning things up and it's all sitting outside our storage room and I'm like, "Oh, I have to put that away." And it's that feeling all like it all came up again of
mm,
that disappointment and the regret and the just that grief. And
yeah,
those moments will come. And I think
yeah,
I say this a lot because I know men are told this just as much. So it's not that I'm saying it's only women. But when it comes to birth and when it comes to our birth experiences, living babies or not, I across the board, I feel like we have always been told to just kind of be quiet and deal with it, right?
mm,
Because we're the only ones who really can understand that in truth.
mm,
As a woman, I'm my partner, I cannot expect them to understand. They grieve too in their own way. But I think
yeah,
we owe it to ourselves to honor that process and to acknowledge it and do exactly what you're doing because
mm,
it's so needed in our bodies, in our souls, and for future generations. I mean, I have a daughter, and for her to watch me go through this
mm,
time, I felt a bit of a burden in a good way to show her it's okay to process this. It's okay to cry. It was
yeah,
okay for me to be sad. It was okay for it to come out of the blue. And that's
mm,
not my normal personality. So, yeah. So I think there's so much to that processing that just keeps going.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like you said, it does pass down to generations because if
Yes.
you're keeping that, bottled up or you're hiding that away from your children, they're going to think that feeling emotion isn't normal.
Right.
Um, my my daughter my daughter is so emotional right now and way too emotional for my
Mine
husband
too.
to
Yeah.
handle.
Yeah. How old is your daughter?
3.5.
I was gonna say, so it gets better at 9. I just want to let you know.
So I've got to wait till 9, okay.
No, I mean it gets worse. I was sarcastic. Wait till 9. 9 is like the new 3, apparently. This is all I
Yeah,
can tell you. Whew.
yeah,
I thought
just
like 13 would be the thing, but no, no.
it just changes, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
every time you think, "Oh, they'll get to that age and it'll be okay," and it isn't, like, it's
Yeah.
just different.
Yeah.
Um, but I need to show her that showing that her expressing her emotions is okay, for her to cry, it's okay, and uh, she's okay to, to her degree, be able to tell me, what's actually happening for her. And not to shut her up, not to stop her from crying because essentially then she's going to take that belief through with her that she can't show emotion and she will be then the one that will keep suppressing it and
Yeah.
and I actually have come across women who have been in that environment with their families. It was a sign of weakness to show emotion, so now as an adult she doesn't cry. And I
Yeah.
was just and in all of these, like, challenging times in her life, she's never cried.
Mm.
And I'm like, your body in its natural state is always trying to come back to balance. It's always trying to come back to a state of, you know, homeostasis. And
Yeah,
essentially, emotions are energy. Emotions are designed to come and just to keep moving through you. They're not designed to stay stuck
yeah,
within you.
good
That
point.
energy inside of you is not healthy.
Yeah.
Um, and I can't imagine. I've always been one to cry at the smallest little things too. So, you know, my daughter's probably just me reincarnated.
Probably.
But I'm I'm quite comfortable showing my emotion. I'll cry. She's seen me cry. You know, she'll go up and give kids a cuddle if they're crying.
It creates
Um,
an empathy. It's beautiful. Yeah.
yeah. So, you know, I don't like I could only imagine what, you know, this girlfriend of mine had been through to not be able to show her emotion. And now as an adult, she knows that it's not right.
Right.
She's like acknowledged, she's like, but I just physically can't.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I'm just with everything that I know about emotions and how they are a natural part of you. They aren't negative, they aren't positive. Your body just acknowledges them as emotions.
Yeah.
We're the ones that give it a negative or positive meaning,
That's right.
but it's just designed to come through you. And um it a lot of the emotions are designed to be released. They're very much
Yes.
releasing
Yeah.
something within you.
Well, it's the idea that tears can, it might sound corny, but tears are very healing. They are.
Mm.
It's a release that your body on it. And again, I come back to the cellular aspect because that's where I love to look. But
Yeah.
I teach a class on it's called essential emotions, and it's the science of emotions. And when
Mm,
you look at what emotions seem like this flighty thing floating in our body that just hits
mm,
us without warning, right?
mm,
But it is completely a physical reaction within
mm,
our cells that happens. It's an interaction with cell receptors and with pulling it into your cell life and how it affects your physical body, your mind, all of it. And like you said, that energy vibrating in there in those cells and in our body isn't meant to be contained and pushed down or repressed.
mm.
It's meant to be released. So
Yeah.
it's such a good reminder because again, sometimes as moms, we just feel like we have to hold it all together,
Mm,
or we need to get on with life. People need us. And I
mm.
remember this was the first time my daughter said to me, she's like, I've never seen you cry before. And I was like, that's probably true.
Like, I
Right?
have
Because I
cried, but
know.
maybe not in front of you.
I
Yeah.
said, exactly. It's true. But that was a very eye-opening statement for me because it was just that. It's that
Mm,
feeling of I do need to keep it all together. I am the mom who keeps it all together for everybody, but I do
yeah.
cry when but not in front of you. And it wasn't that she was, criticizing it at all. It was more of a, huh, I'm sad too, and so are you. Oh, so this is okay. And she curled right up
Mm.
beside me in bed while I was recovering, and we both cried. But it was very healing. And I know it was for her because she's a tough little cookie too. Like it's hard for her to let that sadness
Mhm.
show. So
Yeah.
our kids are such good teachers for all that kind of stuff,
Oh,
right?
yes,
It's
big
beautiful. Oh
time.
my goodness. I love it.
They're forever teaching us. She's forever teaching me. Yeah.
So speaking of our rainbow baby, so my daughter's my rainbow baby as well. Tell me a little bit about that experience, or just what our listeners in general, if they are facing another pregnancy or trying to get pregnant again, or in the midst of one, what does that
Mm,
feel like? What does that look like? I can share my feelings, but it's nice to hear it from someone else because it seems a bit universal. It really does. It's
mm.
not. Each of our stories are unique, but those fears are very universal.
Yeah. I've been doing a lot of, sort of talking around this as well, recently, just in the whole parenting after loss, sort of space as well, because
Mm.
it all actually stems back to really addressing your loss. It all comes back to really feeling those emotions after your loss, because if you don't acknowledge them and you don't allow them the space to be heard, that then is heightened in trying to conceive, and it's heightened again in the pregnancy itself, and can could potentially stop you from connecting to the baby because you're afraid of connecting to it and then maybe losing it.
Yeah.
My my for me, I didn't start trying again until I was mentally ready. Until I asked myself, if I was able to fall pregnant and I lost it, how would I cope?
Right.
Because I needed to know that I was going to be okay if the worst case scenario was going to happen again.
Mm.
Because I know a lot of women who try and fall pregnant just to fill that space, to fill the void, and it's not necessarily the way it's going to happen, because essentially if it happened again, their emotions, they're just going to, the floor is going to open up and they're going to
Yeah.
swallow them whole,
It's
because
trauma on top of trauma, and it just
yeah,
builds. Yeah.
it's just going to keep embedding into itself and creating more of a bigger problem and bigger issues emotionally and physically.
Right.
So, I had to make sure I asked myself that specific question. I'm like, if I was to lose this baby, how would I cope?
Mhm.
And, when I could answer that and I could be okay, like, I would hurt, it would be, a horrible experience again, but I would be okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to, I acknowledged the depression and I knew that, I could cope if all of that was going to come through. So, we started trying again, and I think it was about maybe about the second month of trying that we fell pregnant, and it was a very reserved happiness because we are like, oh yay, like we're pregnant, but I don't really want to
Yeah.
go over the top. We told everyone again, essentially, as soon as we found out, because we knew we wanted the support straight away, if it
Right.
was to go the same way as before. Um, don't get me wrong, the fear was there. I
Mhm.
was a crazy person talking to my fear all the time
Aw.
because I had to the only way for me to process my fear was to talk to it, was to ask it, because essentially our emotions are coming to teach us something, they're coming to show us something, and our thoughts and our emotions can be attached to past conditioning, or conditioning and
Yeah.
past experiences.
Yeah.
So, my fear doesn't come to keep you stuck. It's coming to show you something. So I had to understand what my fear was coming to show me. And it was it was coming to keep me safe, because it obviously didn't want me to be hurting again.
Right.
So I was forever talking to my fear and understanding it, and being able to be in a position to, release it and to say that I was okay, and that I could understand why it was coming, but I didn't need it. I didn't need it to keep me safe anymore. I was okay.
Right.
Um, but I took myself to the hospital when I was like 18 weeks because I had these cramps, and I was like, I don't know what they are, and I was scared.
Yeah.
So I took myself to the hospital, and they're like, "What have you eaten that might be different?"
That's you're like,
Oh.
oh, really? Yeah.
So it was me, it was something that I had eaten, and I was like, "Ah, well, luckily it was just that,"
Thank
and
goodness. Yeah.
it was gas, so, we were good. Um, but yeah, throughout the whole pregnancy, I was grateful for that opportunity. I was grateful for all the horrible things that I was experiencing, because I still knew that she was safe.
Yes.
And I was able to bond with her. Every night I would touch my stomach, and I would have a chat with her, and um I really, really just wanted to embrace that opportunity. I didn't want my loss to overshadow that, and to sort of not allow me to really enjoy the miracle that it is, really, to be pregnant. So and it's something that I'd wanted so, so much, like, in my life. That was, how I saw my life playing out, get married, have kids, have a house, buy a house, like, that's it.
Yeah.
So, although the week before So because of my epilepsy, I had to be induced. They wanted to control the birth,
Right.
so that I wouldn't have seizures through the birth, because they don't obviously didn't know how that kind of trauma to the body was going to react with my
Yeah.
epilepsy. Um, so I had a date that I was going in, and they only wanted me to wait to the 40-week mark.
Yeah.
So the week leading into that, because I knew that I was obviously going in, I cried. I cried and I
Mm.
cried the whole week, because I was then so scared that I wouldn't hear her cry.
Yeah.
My fear from when they said there's no heartbeat had kind of morphed into, I'm sorry, she's not crying.
Yeah.
And it still gives me goosebumps.
Mm.
Um,
I feel it. Yeah.
so so I cried literally the whole week leading into the induction. And once I was there, though, I that fear had gone. I felt like I maybe had addressed it and acknowledged it, and once I got to the hospital, it was gone. It didn't even cross my mind. And then
Mm.
when I was in, obviously, giving birth to her, didn't cross my mind. Although I was talking to a coach friend, and she said, "Well, if you were that scared giving birth to her, your body wouldn't have probably allowed you to, because essentially it's a primitive being, and
It's
if it
true.
feels like it's in danger,
Your
it
labor
won't."
will stop.
Yeah, the labor will stop, and it won't allow you to actually give birth because it feels like it's threatened. And I was like, "Oh, okay."
True. Well, and it's interesting because on my side of things as a labor doula, we would have clients that we'd kind of gotten some we knew, but some we didn't know at all, and we'd take a few weeks to get to know them. And you get into labor, and suddenly at 7 or 6 centimeters, the entire labor shuts down.
Mm,
And medically, everyone's like, "Well, we're gonna have to do this, this, and this." And yet I knew, I need to get mom real quiet for a minute. We need to talk what's going on. And it
mm,
was things like that. It was
mm,
repressed childhood traumas. It was like some big things would come out all of a sudden. It could be something as, well, we did lose a baby, or we did have this happen, or this is what's going on, or there
mm,
were issues with, just past body issues, and all kinds of things would come out. And as soon as there was space to acknowledge those fears and to even voice them quietly to someone who understood, labor
mm.
would pick right back up and away you go. But that
Yeah.
fight or flight kicks in when your fear is intense. It's a
Mhm.
crazy, amazing way that we're made. Yeah,
Yeah, our body is just that smart, and I believe we don't give it enough credit. We don't
true.
we like, and just wanted to touch on what you said before,
Well,
like,
like
when
when
we
we
give it
give an
emotion,
emotion.
uh, it's not just an emotion, like, and even a thought. It's not just a thought. Like, it actually has the potential to change your body on a cellular level. And it's, you know, we don't give our emotions, we don't give our thoughts enough credit for what they actually
Mhm.
have the capacity to do.
Agreed.
Um, so yeah, just even thinking, that I was going to be that afraid to have her, my body probably wouldn't have allowed me to. Um, She ended up getting the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck, and I ended up having they halfway through my labor, I was pushing, and they kept losing her heartbeat. And
Mm.
even in saying that, like, I wasn't afraid though at that point. Like, even though they kept saying they're losing her heartbeat, I was like, "Okay, you've got it. Like, it's all
That's
under
right. That's your
control."
job. I'm gonna push her out. You do the rest. Yeah.
Yeah, but then they ended up saying, "Push, but don't push to get her out." And I was like, "How do I do that?"
Yeah, be more clear on that one. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
can you just, like, yeah, how does
Define
that
that
work?
for me. Yeah. That's like when you're in the middle of pushing. I have spontaneous pushing, so I can't control it, and they tell you to stop pushing. You're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, that's not gonna happen. It's not an
Well, my
option."
contractions, yeah, they were
They just
coming.
do
They
their
were they were
thing, right?
I was
Yeah.
pushing. I'm like, "I can't not
Yeah.
push."
Yeah. I love
Um, but they both so it was just the midwife, my husband, and me, and so they both sat down and then just left me, and I was like, "How am I go like, I'm having contractions here. How am I gonna stop this?"
Oh my gosh.
But, they needed to get her out, because essentially I was 10 centimeters dilated really, really quick, obviously because of the induction. Um, uh, probably a lot faster than what they actually thought I would get
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
because it was like nothing, 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 and then all of a sudden I was 9 centimeters, and they're like, "Oh, okay,
Wow.
she's coming." But I spent 2 hours pushing. So,
Right.
she was kinda stuck.
Yeah.
Like, essentially, they said the umbilical cord was like a bungee rope around her neck, and it kept just pulling her back
Yeah.
up. So they ended up calling in I ended up having a room full then of, specialists and other
Oh,
nurses and midwives, and they did a vacuum delivery. So, um, and then, like, super quick, just my husband said, unwrapped the
yeah.
cord from around her neck and passed her over to me. Um, but, even in looking back, I'm like, there's so much that could have gone wrong in that sense, like,
Yeah.
especially with the umbilical cord, being wrapped around her neck. Like, I hear so many things, that happen, and I'm like, I'm so glad though that in that moment, none of that
Right.
actually
Exactly.
crossed my mind.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, she ended up, she came out, she was healthy
Mm,
and
that's awesome.
tiny, but I was like, and then we had a whole different issue with breastfeeding. So that was
Wow.
like,
Yeah.
you know, that was my next challenge after, having her was, she didn't latch. I didn't have colostrum. Um, so it was it was an ongoing thing for probably a good 3 months or so
Oh, that's
after
such
she
a thing.
was born.
Yeah. It's like you run this grand marathon to bring this human into the world, and then they hand them to you, and they're like, "Okay, you ready for the next stage?" It might work, it might not. We're not sure
Yeah.
yet. Oh, great, thanks.
And, I was never told about breastfeeding even. You just sort of assume that they latch and, it's all fine and roses. And, she didn't latch. She annihilated my nipples.
Ah,
She ended up having to mix feed her, although now she's 3.5 and she's still breastfed. So I'm
love it.
still I stuck
It's
with
funny
it.
though, because speaking of traumas, that was one thing as a postpartum doula that I trained in was birth trauma for babies. And we use the term trauma cautiously
Mm,
because you do what you have to do to have a baby safely, whether it's vacuum or
mm,
force up or C-section. But with each of those interventions comes an effective trauma on either their neck muscles or their skull or their jaw that then impacts breastfeeding. It's just like
yeah.
a boom, 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 but they don't tell you that. It's
No.
just it's just assumed you're gonna figure it out, and it drives me crazy because when I was
Yeah.
working in that field, I would go visit these mamas at 24 hours postpartum or a day or two postpartum, and same, their nipples are raw and they're crying and their baby's hungry and all these things that could have just been avoided if someone had just said to them, "By the way, you may
Mm,
need to have your child seen, within the next few hours by a craniosacral specialist to make sure their neck can be released so they're not screaming when they go to latch on." And
yeah.
all these things, there's so much, but
So much.
it can be just
Yeah.
up to then. So yeah, no kidding, it
I
was hard.
I was I was literally, I think, crying for a solid week while she was crying, and we
Oh,
were
it's so
both just
hard.
crying together.
Yeah.
I'm
I
like, I
breastfed
don't
all my babies and it worked fine. I mean, I breastfed them easily and they were wonderful for over 3 years for almost all of them. And I still cried. My
yeah,
whole first week was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't think they're eating. And meanwhile, this is what I've done for a living for years, helping moms
yeah,
with this. And I didn't know what I was doing.
yeah,
You still have all the hormones, all the emotions, all the I don't knows. Is everything okay?
yeah, and that's another thing too, like, after you go through loss, like, I was constantly checking her when she was asleep
That
for, if
worry.
she was
Mhm.
breathing, and, you know, I'm like, "Oh," I could acknowledge it when it was coming, but it was hard to not go over and check. Even the nights that she actually did end up sleeping through, I
Yeah.
was, like, up every 2 hours checking on her, and I'm like, I didn't sleep, like,
Yeah.
didn't feel like I slept a wink because I
Yeah.
was still looking to see if she was okay.
Yeah.
So essentially the fear in that sense too, it doesn't leave you, it just changes. And, um, again, it's just finding ways that, you can acknowledge that for yourself, and you can move through that, and you can say, well, I'm experiencing this because of, and I can trace it back to my loss. Like, and it's all sort of embedded in there. And then, but when I can sort of talk to myself about it, like I still sometimes would go over and check anyway, but I just knew that that's what I was doing.
Yes. Yeah, as
Um,
opposed to more of an obsessive reaction. It was
yeah,
more conscious, right? You're like, "Okay, I am feeling anxious right now, and, I'm sure she's fine, but I'm gonna look anyway because 'cause it'll help me feel better." Right?
yeah, yeah,
Well, as opposed to just obsessively checking all the time and just wearing that worry in the pit
mm,
of your stomach to the point where you have tummy issues then,
yeah,
or you have
yeah,
digestive problems, or now you've got pain between your shoulder blades, you don't know why.
mm.
These things that your body says, "Hello, over here."
Listen to me. You've got to listen. You've got to do something about this.
Yeah,
Your body, your mind is good at really sort of switching things off for you, but
yeah,
your body will always come back and remind you that there's something there that you haven't addressed. And you know ignoring something for that moment might work short term, but long term it's going to come back, and your body will just keep presenting something to you until you sit
yeah,
back, stand up, or do just listen. Like, it will keep just giving you something until you listen.
absolutely.
But yeah, there, and even like now, like at 3.5, like there's so many things that are, you know, she she got through the gate at the front door and ran out to the garbage truck.
Mm,
And I was like, in my heart, I'm like, oh no, like I could just picture her getting out onto the road and being
yeah,
hit. And like created like this big thing in my head, but then I'm like, I still got a fear of losing her.
yes,
And it's but if I acted on that fear, I stopped her from doing things that are going to help her growth and development, she's not going to grow and develop.
right.
If I put my fears onto her, she's not going to be the person that she's meant to be.
That's right.
So it's about me taking a step back and having to acknowledge, what it is that I'm moving through, but acknowledging it, not just ignoring it and letting it just all fester,
Yes, absolutely.
dry.
One of the tricks that I had a therapist one time say to me was, you, this sounds crazy to say this really when you're in the moment, but asking yourself, okay, hold on, what is the worst that could happen? Let's say with
Mm,
the garbage truck. Yes, she could run out in the road. Yes, she could hit, and yes, she could die. That is the worst could happen, and I would be wrecked, right? Like you have to ask yourself that. But that's where you have a moment to think that through, take a breath, and go,
mm,
all right. Now, instead of me losing it and screaming at them and yelling, out of all those reactions out of fear, I
mm.
am going to stop that from happening, but I'm going to do it in a manner that isn't going to traumatize them either.
Yeah, yeah,
Right? Because I
exactly.
know there
Yeah.
were reactions I had after with my daughter when she was a baby, and she was a very sick baby. So we went through some horrible. That's what started me on this entire journey. Actually, she's my muse, I guess. But it was a very real fear that I would wake up in the morning and she would not be breathing.
Mm,
We went through a year of that, and it was trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. It just wrecked me physically, emotionally, all of it for that whole first year. But now as she's growing and she's 9 now, and we're getting to those ages where giving freedom becomes more apparent, and she's growing up. And like you said, I have to remind myself, I'm not, you can just take a breath, right?
mm.
She wants to make a choice on her own. What's the worst that's going to happen?
Yeah.
I can come up with like 20 scenarios of how horrible this is going to end. But realistically,
Yeah.
I have to be able to swallow that breath down a little bit and just let it ride out and go, okay, this is how I'm
Mm,
feeling right now. A lot of this is fear. My reaction is fear based. My
mm.
response to her is coming out of my fear. So I want to be
Yeah.
careful because I don't want it to be that, because anger
Yeah.
comes out of fear. Our reaction
Yeah.
comes out of fear, all kinds of things. So
Mm.
hard though.
Oh, it's so hard. And
Yeah,
it is just taking that moment to sort of process,
yeah,
what's going on for you. And like I talk a lot as well about responding rather than reacting, because
Yes,
when we react, it is usually out of fear or out of something that's happened, and we'll say things potentially that we don't actually mean to say as well. Get angry, do something potentially that doesn't serve the situation.
yeah,
So when you're able to take that step back and to actually sort of really think about it, it could only be, a few seconds or,
yep,
to allow you to process, what could actually happen. But you're in a much better place to respond to the situation and to have a, you know, she was fine. She came back in. We had a discussion. I'm like, you
that's right.
can't run out, darling, and like you can't do that. We ended up closing the gate back on the door again, and I didn't get angry at her for doing that because she doesn't know any better.
Right.
But if I had have reacted out of my fear, it would have been a
Yeah,
hell of a lot worse, and like you said, a
absolutely.
lot more traumatic for her.
Yeah, and we all
Um,
do it. We all do it. Like, I think there's also this weight we wear that we have to get it right every time. There were
yeah,
moments I reacted in fear and I yelled about something that scared me to death, right?
yeah,
I've got two very active boys. So it's the same kind of scenario for me where I'm like, okay, just breathe. They're gonna be okay. I don't know what you think you're doing right now, but
yeah,
whew, there was some
yeah,
yelling many days, but you're right. Like, I think it's more about that learning the process of, I always say take a breath, because if I take a minute to just take a really deep breath and blow it out, unless someone's literally going to get hurt in that instant,
yeah,
take that moment to just take a breath, and your brain will do the work. It does.
mm,
It does run through those moments, but it's something about that just gives us a minute to face it, and instead
mm,
of reacting, you get a chance and you get a choice. Then, how am I
yeah,
going to respond right now? But
yeah,
when that trauma is unresolved, when that, there's a buildup of trauma, like I spent
mm,
years dealing with myself, though it's really hard to do that.
yeah,
It really has to be acknowledged. It has to be walked through. And
mm,
I think a big part of that is doing that with someone who can help you do it. And
mm,
that's something you're doing. So, that's why I said even at the beginning, I love what you're doing, because it is such a needed conversation. But as a
mm,
mom, even for me, I've been a doula, I've been all the things, I've worked with these families, I've worked in these scenarios, I've done bereavement doula work, with moms who know they're about to deliver a stillborn baby, things like that. Even you can know all the stuff, but when it's you walking through
mm,
it, I needed somebody else. I needed
yeah,
to be able to talk to someone and to sound that off and to just say, what's the next step for me?
mm,
How am I processing this? Am I processing this well? But on
mm,
that same respect, and I want to bring light to what you do, is that you also are helping educate professionals who are working with these mamas. So
yeah,
I think that is so powerful, because they need that aspect. I won't
mm,
get into it this on this session, but I had a I had a terrible, I would say, I only work with midwives normally. I've never had to have a doctor or an obstetrician in my births. Um, and unfortunately, in this situation, I ended up needing a consult with one of our local obstetricians. I'd never met her before, and it was a horrible interaction. It
mm,
left me more traumatized than cared
mm.
for in the middle of what was going down. Um, so I really feel that there is something to be said for teaching and just helping them even just open their eyes to what we're going through in those moments.
Yeah, and like, I just wanted to touch on what you said before, like, sometimes the healers need healing too.
Yes.
It's not I've had to have my own coaches bring light to what I've gone through,
Yeah.
to my experience, because you're so focused on helping other people that sometimes you do start to take on things that, you don't realize. And I think with one of my coaches, I spent, like, the first month just crying doing all of her sessions and workbooks, because I was like, there was so much stuff that I thought I had processed, but
Yeah.
there was more layers to it. There was more layers that were coming to my awareness, and that's how your body works. Like, it will reveal your next layer to process when it's ready,
Right.
and it's a ever evolving process. Like, your body will just always keep giving you something to touch on, to move through, to heal, to release. um and, I believe, just through my experience, there was not enough support specific to pregnancy loss. And, you do have your counselors and psychologists, but they're just general
Yeah.
kind of grief-based. There's no real understanding of what it really is that you have been through, why you are feeling the way that you feel, why you have created these thoughts that you
Yeah.
think. And so after I went through my experience, I knew that I had to use it. I had to use my experience to help other women, because if I was feeling that way, there was other women that were feeling that way too.
Yeah.
And essentially, I like to think of myself as sort of being outside your fishbowl, like you're stuck in your world
Yeah.
and in what's happening for you. I'm outside of that. I can see your whole world. I can see what you've been through, and I can guide you through what it is that you could potentially be struggling with at the time. And so that's where I started offering the one-on-one coaching sessions, and created a program, a 3-month program from that. And then, yeah, like what we discussed before, there was also women that were reaching out to me wanting to know how they could be that support, and educating themselves on how they can better support women within their service. So that's when I then designed another program where I educate women's service providers, and essentially I want to take it into the medical system, because it's not, the doctors don't have that care and compassion and that bedside manner that actually is needed for women that go through pregnancy loss. So, just getting education on how to actually hold space for people.
Mm,
And
definitely.
but the program itself is, about having that next layer of knowledge on how to support your women through your service, because knowing that 1 in 4 pregnancies end in loss, a lot of women are going to be coming through the service
Yeah.
that the women offer, potentially with unhealed emotional trauma, and potentially won't be able to have the full transformation of that service, because they can't move through that trauma. They haven't been able to process it. They've got blocks and limiting beliefs that they've created about themselves, that potentially they feel they're unworthy of having anything good in their life.
Yeah.
Even in pregnancies, you know, I've heard so many women say that they can't connect to their babies, and even after they're birthed, they have postnatal depression, and they can't connect to their baby after they're born, because of the loss that they had experienced.
Mm,
So that just knowing how many different areas of a woman's life the loss touches, there's so many different ways and different places that women can have, which is where I kind of want to, um, like I said to you before, have world domination. Different places that women could gain access to
yeah.
pregnancy loss support. And yeah, I see it's so needed. Um, on one hand, women need to move through their emotions and move through their experience, and they need someone to help them through that. And they shouldn't have to do that alone, because society tries to tell you that it wasn't worth grieving or whatever.
Right.
And on the other hand, women's service providers and health practitioners and stuff need to be educated on how to have that next level of understanding and knowledge. So, I really love what I've created, and I hope that I can spread it as much as possible, and have women healing
Mm.
through their experience on
Yeah,
so many
that's
different levels.
beautiful. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the gift that you're giving, is a voice to, like you said, give some clarity and some guidance, but also ears to hear, and just to let these women be heard. I mean,
Mhm.
after what I went through, I just wanted someone to listen to what I went through. It just,
Yeah.
like, hear can you believe what just went down? With the experience with the OB, I'm like, I need to just sit and tell someone this, because did that really just happen? This is so odd.
Yeah.
And it's so valuable to have a space that's safe to do that. So
Yeah.
that's incredible.
Yeah. I believe that's what I needed after, like, through my healing, and I believed, and that's why I created what I did, because I'm like, I needed someone to kind of validate what I was feeling, because I'm like, everyone I spoke to were like, "Oh, no, like, I haven't experienced a miscarriage. I don't know how you're feeling," or whatever, and I'm like, I just need to talk to someone who gets it, but who can actually help me
Yeah,
through that.
that's the key. We can talk to a lot of people who
Yeah,
may or may not be helpful.
yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Oh my goodness. And one of the things
Yeah.
that I was surprised by, I remember after my first one, was the number of times I said to somebody after, who, people who knew we were pregnant or whatnot, when we had to explain it, oh, and they'd say, oh yeah, I've had 4 miscarriages. What?
Mm,
I didn't, like, friends that I've known for years. Oh yes, we had a miscarriage last year. What? Never
yeah.
heard, never knew, right? Nobody ever said anything, never. And as I've had these conversations, I've had people message me after their podcasts, or after me sharing stories about my loss, and they'll message me and say, thank you for just talking about it. It's as simple
Mhm.
as, I just need to have this conversation. People need to just share that they've been through this.
Yeah.
So you're bringing to light such a needed service, and I 100%, it's like therapy of any kind, I would say it's worth investing in yourself
Mm,
to talk to someone like yourself, because that alone will start you on the path, whether it's the end of your path or not. It will get you those stepping stones to healing, and
yeah.
definitely we need it.
Yeah, and it's an like what we said before, like, healing is an ongoing journey, so whether it has been months or weeks or months or years, like, is always something there for your body to move through, so even though you may not feel, you're like, "Oh, it's been, 5 years since my loss or 10 years since my loss," but you can still acknowledge that within you, that there is something there that
Yeah,
potentially needs to be worked through, then it's something that your body is telling you to listen, you know,
yeah,
move through that. And um yeah, I just want women to know that it doesn't necessarily have to be recent either.
yeah.
Like, it can be, it's like I said, 2017 when I had ours, and I still cry. I
Mhm.
still have fears. I still have triggers. Um but the thing is, you need to know how to move through those, the fears and the triggers and everything, and that sort of comes along with that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Amazing. Well, I love what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing, and I will make sure all your, links and how they can find you is all going to be included in here, so everybody can look you up. I hope we can chat some more. I could talk to you all day. I love this.
I
Actually,
literally could
there's a
talk
handful
all
of
day.
guests there's always this handful of guests that I'm like, okay, we need to just get on the phone one day and just chat, because there, there's just so much that resonates with what I do and what you're doing. So I love it. Thank you for
Yeah.
your time. I appreciate it so much.
No, thank you so much for having me.
So.
It's been a pleasure.
Would you like to learn more? Find me on Instagram and YouTube at Mom Days Podcast.